For 4 years, the Trump administration, I think the simplest way to say it is, did not care about climate policy and actively sought to reverse any of the climate policies that the Obama administration had put forward. We're breaking down the politics of Biden's climate agenda. So let's start with what Joe Biden inherited when he became president in terms of climate policy. So there were two pieces of Biden's inheritance on climate. One was internationally, where it was really in tatters. Other countries that looked to the United States to be a leader in addressing climate change globally and had looked to the Obama administration as an inspiration on the issue, saw the Trump years and found America an unreliable partner. The most important thing that Trump did internationally was he withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
Joe Biden, as a candidate, promised on his first day in office that he would bring the United States back into that agreement, and that's exactly what he did. One president promises something, the other president reverses it. So Biden internationally inherited a massive amount of skepticism from both U.S. allies and competitors like China and Russia. The second thing is, domestically, the United States spent 4 years where climate policy was not a priority in any way whatsoever in the U.S. Congress. And in the federal bureaucracy, a lot of regulations that were climate friendly were repealed by the Trump administration. So Biden's not exactly starting from scratch, but he's behind even where he left things during the Obama-Biden administration. One of his first acts as president was to announce the climate summit that will happen starting on Earth Day, Thursday, April 22nd, a 2-day virtual conference where Joe Biden has invited some 36 world leaders. And probably the most important thing at the White House Climate Summit this week will be Biden's announcement of a new emissions goal. So to back up for a second, the Paris Agreement requires every signatory to come up with an emissions goal. And the way that the scientists have formulated this is it's a reduction of greenhouse emissions from 2005 numbers by 2030. So most climate experts believe that the United States needs to announce a goal of a 50% reduction, that's 50% below 2005 emissions, by 2030. This climate target is known as the nationally determined contribution. That's the language from the Paris Agreement. And the goal of this is to keep the planet from warming another 1.5 degrees Celsius. Anything below 50% that Biden announces is going to be looked at with not a great deal of enthusiasm from people who care about this issue. It matters for two reasons. One, it'll be a signal domestically to how much this administration really cares about climate change. But two, and probably more importantly, it's a signal internationally to how serious America takes climate change. One subplot to watch for at the climate summit this week is the relationship between the United States and China. Biden is coming into office with a pretty hawkish attitude towards China, but he's trying to balance that with a need to get cooperation from China on a lot of important issues, one of which is climate change. So John Kerry, Biden's international climate envoy, was the first senior administration official to travel to China. And the reports of his trip this week were that it was a pretty productive meeting and that he and his Chinese counterparts saw eye to eye on a few issues. The climate conference this week is virtual. Chinese President Xi is supposed to be there and watch to see how the United States and the Chinese interact on this issue and whether it's more cooperative or confrontational. So after Joe Biden announced that the United States was returning to the Paris Agreement, and after he called for a climate summit in this month, he put forward a pretty large climate-focused infrastructure plan, the American Jobs Plan. It's almost $2.5 trillion worth of spending, but about 50% of that spending has some kind of climate focus to it. There's an interplay between the infrastructure package and the 2030 emissions target for the United States that Biden's going to announce this week at the climate summit. Because we're not going to reach a 50% or higher target unless the United States spends heavily on changing our transportation infrastructure, aggressively pursuing alternatives to fossil fuels like solar and wind. One is sort of linked to the other. And if Biden in some of these bipartisan negotiations over infrastructure gives up too much of the climate-oriented infrastructure in that package, well, a lot of our allies who are looking to us to be leaders on climate change are going to scratch their head and say, well, how is the United States going to meet an aggressive emissions target if the Biden White House is cutting an infrastructure deal that returns to heavy spending on fossil fuel intensive infrastructure projects? So watch that closely. Watch the negotiations over infrastructure and how hard Biden fights for climate-related policies that are stuffed into that bill. And that'll tell us a lot about how serious this administration is about climate change. And it'll send a signal to the international community about the same.